jury, please.
All rise for the jury.
All right, everybody, let the witness have a seat, please. If you would face the clerk and be sworn, please.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Have a seat. Before you start this thing today, let me just make a brief comment to the jury. All right, so the state has rested their case. Now we'll proceed into the defense case. Garcia gets to go first, and Ms. McBanaway, if they choose to present anything, and then the state would have an opportunity to put on any rebuttal evidence that they desire to put on as to either of the defense cases. So at this point in time, Mr. Garcia may call his first witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. At this time, Mr. Garcia calls, it's Sergeant now, right?
That's correct.
Sergeant Downing? Can you please state your name and occupation to the jury?
Sergeant Stephen Downing of the Florida Highway Patrol.
And how long have you been with the Florida Highway Patrol, sir?
Since 2010.
And what current capacity do you have with Florida Highway Patrol?
I'm a sergeant.
And were you working with Florida Highway Patrol, I believe as a corporal in 2000, I'm sorry, I don't know what your title was, but were you with Florida Highway Patrol in June of 2014?
That's correct.
And what area would you be working in during that time period?
Lottville County.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and publish to the members of the jury is Government's Exhibit 81. Is that right? Yeah, I did. Okay. So I'm going to zoom this right down here. You are Trooper SMD, is that correct, sir?
That's correct.
And that's your badge number right there, your ID number 3004?
It is.
And is it fair to say that when you become a member of law enforcement with Florida Highway Patrol, you get designated a badge number for identification purposes?
Yes.
And that was your identification purpose?
Yes.
And so on June 4th, which I believe is what let's go ahead and take a look at the citation. On June 4th, 2014 at 9:12 a.m., that's what it says right there. Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
You pulled over a 2011 Hyundai 4-door multicolor. Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
Okay, and if you want me to zoom this out a little bit so we can see it a little bit better. Is that better for you, sir?
Yes.
And who did you indicate was the driver of this vehicle?
Luis Emmanuel Riviera.
And you obtained that information because when you pulled the vehicle over, there was somebody in the driver's seat, correct?
Correct.
And you go over to them and you go, can I get your license and registration, things to that effect?
That's right.
Okay, and Mr. Rivera gave you, I assume, a driver's license?
Yes, I identified him by his license, whether it was he gave me the license or I ran it on the computer and got an ID back.
And that information is what's reflected in the name, street, city portion of the citation, correct?
Yes.
And that's citation A26, V as in Victor, Q as in Quiche, M as in Mary, E as in Edward.
Yes.
Okay. Now, it also says that Mr. Rivera's date of birth is April 25th, 1983. You didn't guess that, did you?
It came right off his license.
And the Hispanic, where it says race, you put an H, I assume that's Hispanic, sir?
Yes.
And he's a male, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and he I assume this is on his license, says 5'4", correct?
Yes.
You didn't take him out of the car and measure him, did you?
I did not.
Okay. Now, there's also some additional information with regards to the vehicle, like the license plate number of the vehicle that's on the citation. Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
Okay. And you visually made this observation, wrote down the license plate, and memorialized it in this citation, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Then the citation you gave him was going 90 miles an hour in a 70, correct?
Correct.
All right. Now, there's a portion here which says companion citations. Is that something that you at that time make a determination as to what you're gonna write there, correct?
Companion citation would be an additional,
Right, and was there one there?
there was not.
Was he driving, was that a motorcycle?
No,
Were there passengers in the vehicle?
don't recall.
Okay, well, if there was a passenger, would you have marked it off under passengers?
Yes,
And was this a commercial vehicle?
it's a four-door Hyundai, that's all I can remember.
Okay. So you issued this citation, correct?
Yes,
Now, would it be fair to say that law enforcement that do traffic stops, which is a lot of what Florida Highway Patrol officers do, it's not all you do, but it's a decent amount of the work that you do?
yes,
Would it be fair to say that you guys are trained in making an observation for impairment?
absolutely.
Okay. And can you tell the members of the jury what kind of training you have to determine impairment?
Several hours of DUI detection. We learned to observe the smells within the vehicle, the way they move, the way they talk, different things in that nature.
Now, I assume because there's no accompanying arrest for DUI or driving under the influence of alcohol and or drugs, that you didn't see anything that would concern you as to whether or not the driver had been consuming drugs or alcohol, correct?
Correct.
Now, Mr. Rivera, it shows he's from Miami Beach, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and if you ran the license of the vehicle at all, did it show you that it was a rental car out of Miami?
If it was registered to a rental company, it would have showed that, yes.
And at any point, did you suspect Mr. Rivera to be under the influence of alcohol?
If there's not a attached incident report with it, then no.
One of the things that in your training as a Florida Highway Patrol officer, do they talk to you about levels of impairment?
Sure.
Okay. So you know the difference between someone having one drink or 12 drinks, right?
Absolutely.
Now, what about with other narcotics? Did they tell you about what the distinction is between one? I'm going to use a very common term here: bump of cocaine. Do you know what that is?
Yes.
A key bump.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when someone puts a little bit of cocaine on a key and uses that as a vehicle to consume the cocaine. Correct?
Yes.
Do you know how much 5 grams of cocaine is?
I couldn't tell you
Well,
what it looked
okay.
like.
So if I told you that someone had consumed 5 grams of cocaine in a 5-hour period, would you agree with me that there would be substantial telltale signs of that kind of impairment?
It should be, yes.
Okay. And you'll agree with me that if someone is doing cocaine inside of a car, that if they are doing it during that short period of time with that amount of consumption, that there would potentially be traces of cocaine all over their clothing or on the seat next to them, or maybe just all in places of plain view that you could see. Correct?
It could be, yes.
Do you see any of that in this case?
Evidently not. There was nothing else.
But if you did,
Right.
you would have done something about it, right?
Sure.
And back then, you were just a trooper, right?
Right.
And now you're a sergeant, correct?
Yes.
Which means you've been promoted from trooper. What's the next? Where do you go from trooper to corporal?
Corporal. That's good.
And then from corporal to sergeant, correct?
Yes.
And you don't get these kind of promotions if you're making these kind of rookie mistakes, right?
Sure.
Now, other than issuing the citation that day, how long would you say that you had, if you recall, the car pulled over?
Just an average traffic stop, I would say 3 to 5 minutes.
3 to 5 minutes. So not an exorbitant amount of period, right?
Right.
Not like you stopped them and they had to stay there for an hour or two because drug dogs got called or anything like that. None of that stuff happened, right?
No.
Okay. Now, as a Florida Highway Patrol officer, there's something called the dash camera. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Okay. A dash camera is something that's, can you tell the jury what the dash camera is?
It's a camera in the front windshield of the vehicle that it records everything that we do once our lights are activated.
Okay. And are you aware or since it was your vehicle, if the state attorney's office or the FBI or any other arm of law enforcement wanted to get a copy of that, they wouldn't send you a subpoena to you, right? It would go to the records department?
Yes.
Okay, are you familiar with how the records department works?
Not exactly.
Right, so you couldn't testify as to what the parameters are with regards to retrieving information, correct?
No.
But you do know that in 2014, in June of 2014, there was a dash camera, correct?
Yes.
No further questions.
McBanaway?
No cross, Your Honor.
Say,
Sergeant Downing, what's the retention time on the dash camera footage?
Back then,
I'm
it,
gonna object when I asked him if he knew the specifics, he said no.
you get redirect, overruled.
What's the retention time on a dash camera video?
I believe on a non-criminal case, it's 30 days.
Okay. And so if we didn't find out about this ticket or it didn't become of interest to us for a couple years later, we wouldn't be able to get that.
Right.
Okay. On this ticket, let me ask you first, do you have any independent recollection of this particular traffic stop?
I do not.
Any independent memory of giving this citation?
I don't.
Any memory of the person you issued the citation to?
I don't, unless I, ran the license again, but there,
Okay, but as you sit here today, you can't picture this person.
I cannot.
All right. And you mentioned you typically get the driver's license from the driver when you're issuing a citation. If there are occupants in the vehicle, do you typically collect the driver's license from those folks as well?
Not always, no.
For a traffic ticket, you wouldn't normally, unless you had a reason to, try to identify occupants that are in the vehicle other than the driver, would you?
Correct.
Okay. And how many citations would you say you've written since June of 2014?
Thousands.
And your indication that there were no passengers in this particular vehicle, is that based on this box right here? This greater than or equal to 16 passengers or something else?
Basically it defaults to no unless we put a passenger number in there.
Okay, so let me show you what I'm going to mark for identification as states. $191 and $192. Take a moment to look that over. Do you recognize states 191?
Yes.
Does that appear to be a fair and accurate copy of a portion of the FHP policy manual?
Yes.
All right, and if you'll go to the tabbed portion there, and this is the same text that you'd see if you go to the FHP website.
Yes.
All right, this link here, the fhsmv.gov/courts/UTC, would that be a hyperlink to go to States 192, the Uniform Traffic Citation Training Manual?
Yes.
All right, and if you'll look at this tab in the Uniform Traffic Citation Training Manual, it looks like that 121 is only to be checked if it's
Objection, Judge.
Overruled.
Looks like that box that you checked is only to be checked if it's a 16-passenger vehicle. Is that right?
Again, if you don't put a number, it's all electronic, so if you don't go in there and physically put a number on there, it's going to default and check the no. It's not something I go in there and check each box.
Okay, but wouldn't you only check yes if it was a 16-passenger vehicle?
Objection, Judge.
Your legal objection.
Yes, speculation.
Overruled.
Wouldn't you only check yes in the instance that this was a 16-passenger vehicle?
Yes.
All right, and a Hyundai Sonata is not a 16-passenger vehicle, is it?
It is not.
No further questions.
Redirect.
Yes. Sergeant Downing, I know with the
Wait,
prosecutor.
I'm sorry, we had 190, 192, they were just marked
for
for proper,
identification.
okay. All right, I just want to make sure.
Sergeant Downing, you know what the prosecutor just showed me saying that only applies to if you have over 16 passengers or not, right?
Right.
That's not what you thought of when you wrote this ticket, right?
It was not.
Right. What you thought of was that there's no passengers, and that's what I wrote, correct?
Again, unless I specifically went in there and put a number in, I can say for a fact that on many citations that, they may have passengers, but that'd be something that I would forget to go in there and plot or put a number on. It would always default to no. It's not something that it's not something we're required to do on a citation as far as before it lets us submit it.
Okay, so, let's see here. Do you recall taking a deposition in September of 2018, sir?
Sure.
And you recall that Mr. DeCoste and myself were there, right?
Yes.
And I'm going to it's now Sergeant Downing's deposition. Pages 7. Lines 17 to 22. We asked you, and there might be a section on there that has passengers. I can't remember. I'm sorry, this is your answer. I'm sorry, let me go to 15 to 22, Judge. So the note section would be what part would be the part where it says other violations or comments pertaining to offense, and you wrote, there might be a section on there that has passengers. I can't remember. These are old electronic ones. Question, can you take a look? And you took a look, and it says, yeah, it says no passengers. That's why I have marked. That's why I have that marked. You recall that, sir?
Yes.
No further questions, sir.
Any juror have a question of this witness? All right, if not, you can step down.
Thanks, sir.
We need to keep him any further? Might need him further?
No, Your Honor.
No, sir.
All right, you're excused. Thanks for your here. Call your next witness.
Judge, the defense calls John Sawicki.
Okay.
I'll go grab him, sir.
Some courthouses have a witness room where we can kind of intercom to the witnesses to come in. We don't have anything like that, so the lawyers just have to go grab the witnesses. The bailiffs have special, particular assignments. We don't send the bailiffs out to get witnesses. If you'd face the clerk and be sworn, please.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony given this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Have a seat. Slide up the microphone, please.
May I inquire, Judge?
You may.
Could you please introduce yourselves to the members of the jury?
My name's John Sawicki, S-A-W-I-C-K-I,
And that's J-O-H-N or J-O-N?
J-O-H-N.
Could you tell the members of the jury how you're employed?
I'm a forensic computer scientist and an electronic evidence consultant.
What does that mean?
Essentially what that means is I dig through computers, cell phones, cell phone records, attempt to determine what the user's done with the device, document what I find, and prepare to testify about it later.
Do you spend any time conducting research with regards to cell tower analysis?
I do.
How long have you been employed in this manner?
I started my company in 2011. I left my law practice to do this full-time in 2013.
So before you became an expert in this field or someone that testifies with regards to this field, you were an attorney?
I was, yes.
And how long were you an attorney?
I spent about 7 or 8 years practicing mostly labor and employment litigation.
Not criminal defense?
Not criminal defense, except for maybe a rare case.
Are you admitted to practice law in the state of Florida?
I am.
Do you have any other special licenses?
I have a private detective's license in Georgia.
And before that?
I spent 9 years with the Douglas County, Oregon Sheriff's Office.
So, law enforcement, private investigator, attorney, and now you testify with regards to this specialty.
Yes, sir.
What kind of education do you have, if you don't mind me asking?
I have an undergraduate degree from George Fox University in Management Human Resources. I have a law degree from Florida State University. I have a graduate certificate in computer forensics from the University of Central Florida. I have a master's degree in digital forensics from the University of Central Florida.
In addition to those degrees, do you have any specialized training in the field that you work in?
Yeah, I have somewhere in the neighborhood of 600 to 700 hours of specialized training in computer and forensics applications, interpreting cell tower records, how cell phone networks operate.
Do you have any training specifically in the area of cell tower analysis?
I do.
And can you tell the members of the jury what this training is?
Yeah, I've had training from a company called Access Data in how call detail records work, how to interpret them. Training from a company called Terracom Training Institute, again, in how cell tower networks function and operate. Took a course from a company called PA Tech in how to map cell calls, cell tower activity. I've done graduate level coursework in the area of radio frequency engineering through the University of California, San Diego's extension program.
About how many cases have you been in involving cell tower analysis?
Somewhere in the neighborhood of 600 or 700.
And have they all been criminal cases?
No, they have not. We've started using cell tower analysis in civil cases as well.
Have you ever given expert testimony in this area?
I have probably 50 or 60 times.
And does that mean that you've testified 50 or 60 times?
Somewhere in that range. I don't have a complete log, but it's in that neighborhood.
And these testimonies are in state or federal court or both?
State and federal court in states across the country.
How many of the Florida judicial circuits have you given expert testimony in?
At this point, I believe 15.
And how many are there in total?
There are 20.
So 15 out of 20?
Yes, sir.
And what circuit are we in here?
This would be the second judicial circuit.
And how many times have you testified in the second judicial circuit?
A handful.
How many cases on your caseload are criminal versus civil in percentage-wise?
It fluctuates depending on the particular time, but at this point, probably 60 or 70% are criminal.
Have you presented any training courses in this area of expertise that you have?
I have. I routinely provide continuing legal education training to judges and lawyers throughout Florida and Georgia in how cell tower networks operate, how electronic devices store data, and how to extract that data.
Your Honor, at this time, I would tender Mr. Sawicki as an expert witness.
Any board hire?
No, Judge.
All right, may proceed.
Okay, so you're familiar with this case, correct?
I am.
And my firm has retained you with regards to your expertise in this field, correct?
Yes, sir.
And my firm represents Mr. Garcia, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you've gotten all the calls and the iCloud stuff and all the other data that the jury's seen today, correct?
I don't know what the jury's seen today, but I've certainly had the opportunity to review a vast amount of data.
And it's a lot of stuff, right?
There's a lot of material.
Okay. So you're aware that there's a defendant in this case named Luis Rivera, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you're aware that there is, I don't know if I call him a target or the person of interest, but you're aware who, you know who Charlie Adelson is, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you know what kind of phone Luis Rivera had?
I understand he had an iPhone.
And when I'm talking about what kind of phone he had, I mean during the relevant portion of this case from June 2014 till, let's say, July 2014.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So Luis Rivera had an iPhone, that was your testimony?
As I understand it.
And what about Charlie Adelson? Do you know what kind of phone he had?
I understand he had an iPhone as well.
And how would you know this? How do you get this information?
From the records that I've reviewed.
Okay, and from the records you reviewed, can you tell the members of the jury, like, you got an AT, like, they both had AT&T, correct? Or at least I know Luis Rivera had AT&T, correct?
I believe they both had AT&T, yes.
And when you get certain information from subpoenas from AT&T, do they provide this information to you? What kind of phone was used?
They do. There's a series of records that you get in response to subpoenas or search warrants that the government did in this case. You get subscriber records, which would indicate who an account holder would be when the account was established, potentially the address for the individual. You also get call detail reports that list different activities on the phone. In the case of AT&T, it could be phone calls, SMS and MMS text messages, and data records as well.
So, with regards to iPhones, do iPhones have the ability to make a call or to send a message that would not show up on a call detail report?
They do.
Okay. Explain to the members of the jury how something like this would happen.
So the call detail record essentially shows the transaction I was just talking about, the phone calls and the text messages. It also shows the data, but that's like one big bucket, so you don't get to see every individual piece that's within it. But the phone is able to use a variety of different messaging platforms, calling platforms, that'll never actually show on a call detail report as a phone call or as a text message.
Now, have you reviewed the iCloud extraction for Charlie Adelson in this case?
I have.
And when did you do that?
Most recently over the weekend.
This last weekend?
Yes, sir.
And did you find any evidence of deleted material in Charlie Adelson's iCloud?
I did.
What does that mean?
So there's really two different components to deleted material. The first piece, let me take a step back. The iCloud shows material from the phone that's been backed up to the cloud, somebody else's server across the internet. And so in this case, it happens to be Apple's server, and Apple stores those backups. It's kind of like taking a snapshot of the phone throughout time. In this particular iCloud backup, we can actually see that there is deleted material that's been marked as deleted, both in the areas of phone calls and text messages.
Are you able to show other deletions that aren't detailed in the iCloud data?
We can. One of the ways that we can do that is we can look to areas where we know how many particular events occurred and see if that matches with the number of events that are shown within the iCloud report. So for example...
Could you give us a specific example?
Sure. For example, within the iCloud report, we see SMS messages and MMS messages. We also see those within the call detail report.
And hold on. Are we talking about anyone in particular in this case? This is still Charlie Adelson's, correct?
Well, we're speaking in general about AT&T and iClouds, but specifically for Mr. Adelson, we can see that as well.
Was there a specific example on Mr. Adelson's iCloud account that you could tell the members of this jury which highlighted these deletions?
Yeah, we were able to compare SMS and MMS messages for particular periods of time, and I think there were two different sets of call detail reports that I looked at to compare the call detail report to the iCloud information to see what was actually there. And what we saw was a significant number of messages that appeared within the call detail report that didn't show up within the iCloud information.
So that means that there is a record of an actual event taking place, right?
Yes, sir.
And so iCloud is like, and you described this to me the other day, so I want you to describe it to the members of the jury, because I didn't understand how iCloud works. Can you tell the members of the jury how iCloud keeps track of your data? So
the iCloud data is essentially your phone automatically backing itself up to a computer remotely. And it does this, depending on how it's set up, at regular intervals or when you force it to do so. And so you effectively get a number of different snapshots of what it looks like across time.
So let me ask you a question. So if an iPhone, let's say Charlie Adelson's iPhone backs up at 9 o'clock, okay? And well, let's say from 1 o'clock to 9 o'clock is when they do its data retrieval. And someone sends a message at 4 o'clock and then deletes it, would it be part of the call detail report?
It should be part of the call detail report if it's sent as a text message.
Would it be in the iCloud?
Not necessarily. It could show in a couple of different ways. It could show, well, actually, I take that back. It only show in one way. It could show as deleted. If it's still sitting within the database within the phone for text messages at the time that it backs up, it could still show as a deleted text message. Or if it's been overwritten from that point, it won't show up at all.
Well, what about, let me give you, I know that we talked about this. Let's tell the members of the jury what you found out when you ran an analysis between May 1st of 2014 and June 20th of 2014 for Charlie Adelson. Do you remember how many messages were on his phone using SMS and MMS?
If I could look to my notes.
Of course you can. Let me take a look, refresh the recollection, and let's adequately refresh my memory.
For the call detail report from May 1st to June 20th, there were 3,084 SMS and MMS messages. Within the iCloud, there were 1,241.
Okay. So, I'm terrible with math, so let me go to my calculator here. So there were 3,084 messages, and 1,084 of them appeared. That means there were 1,800 messages that were sent that don't appear in the iCloud documentation, correct?
That's correct.
That's more than half.
It appears that way.
Now, did you review any other time period? I mean, obviously you know between May 1st and June 20th is kind of the beginning phases of this conspiracy, coming up to a relevant portion of this conspiracy. You're aware of that, correct?
Yes, sir.
Well, did you review any other time periods to see if this was a consistent thing that Mr. Adelson did?
I reviewed a second set of call detail reports for Mr. Adelson from June 18th of 14 through July 18th of 14.
And during your review, how many messages were sent via SMS and MMS?
The call detail reports shows 1,587 messages sent.
From Charlie Adelson? From
Yes,
his
sir.
phone?
Well, sent or received.
Okay, sent or received. How many of those appeared in the Celebrite extraction?
789.
So 1,587 minus 789. Sorry, 1,587 minus. All right, minus 789. So that means that 798 of those messages are gone. Almost half.
It's a significant number.
And is there any way to account for what those messages said or who they were sent to?
There's not.
Can you explain this difference?
All I can say is it's not in the iCloud backup when that was created. So it could have been deleted. There could have been some other reason it didn't back up to the cloud, but all we know is it wasn't captured.
Have you seen the iCloud data for Luis Rivera?
I have not.
You have not.
No, sir.
What about Katie Magmanoa?
I've seen minimal iCloud data for Ms. Magdanowa.
Have you reviewed Katie Magmanoa's cell tower usage for the morning of July 19th, 2014?
I have.
Did your review of Mr. Adelson's iCloud, during your review, of Mr. Adelson's iCloud account, did you find evidence of other communication platforms?
I did.
Okay. Was there evidence that he had a messaging app called WhatsApp?
There was.
What about Threema
There was.
and FaceTime?
Yes, sir.
So is it possible that Charlie Adelson communicated directly with Luis Rivera?
I can't exclude that possibility.
And that's based on the fact that he had these other messaging apps, correct?
Yes, sir.
Have you reviewed Ms. Magmanoa's phone records?
I have.
And were you able to identify the towers her phone used at the time the government said that suggested that she was at Jessica Rodriguez's apartment on, I believe, July 19th, 2014?
I was.
Okay. Where are those towers located?
The towers that I understand the government believes, the call detail reports indicate she was using between 10:02 and 10:32 on the morning of the 19th. The tower is located about 2/3 of a mile southeast of Miss Rodriguez's home, right on Biscayne Boulevard.
And is that tower located in between Charlie Adelson's address in Broward and Miss Magmanoa's residence in Miami Beach?
I believe it is, yes.
And have you ever been to Miami?
I have.
And would you disagree that Biscayne Boulevard is one of the most common travel routes in South Florida for Miami?
I can't speak to most common, but it is a heavily traveled street.
Now, let me ask you a question. How, with regards to the antennas on that tower, how has Sprint identified the antennas on that tower?
There's actually two sets of antennas on the tower.
I'm sorry, let me ask you that, I forgot to ask you. Ms. Magmano's phone is with the Sprint network, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and so how has Sprint identified the antennas on that tower?
There are actually two sets of antennas on the tower which basically overlap one another. They've numbered the two sets as 7740 and 6740.
Okay, how are these antennas laid out?
So it's not unlike a typical cell structure in that we do have three antennas. Now, while many cell structures are laid out with each of those focused at 120-degree angles from one another, so that you would have one at 0 degrees, one at 120 degrees, one at 240 degrees, these are shifted slightly.
And do you know what they are?
If I could refer to my notes.
Yeah, please. So normally it's 0, 120, and 240, correct?
Correct. In this case, it's 10 degrees, 200 degrees, and 260 degrees. So they've shifted them slightly.
And do you know why the antennas aren't at the optimal 120-degree angle?
Well, in this case, you have a highly traveled street which runs right next to the antenna, so it would make sense if they were shifted to increase the capacity. Antenna 1, which would be to the north, is pointed slightly to the northeast, so it essentially points right down Biscayne Boulevard. The other two antennas, which are pointing to the southeast and southwest, frankly, they're both pointing to the southwest slightly, have been shifted so they would shoot down the south of Biscayne Boulevard. Essentially what it does is it creates additional coverage in the area.
And this is the area between Ms. Magmano's residence and Charlie Adelson's residence, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, were you able to determine the frequency of how often Ms. Magmano's phone used that tower between May of 2014 and September of 2015?
Yeah, approximately 1,100 times that her phone used that cell tower.
So do you have a percentage of the amount of time that her phone was being used?
Yeah, it's about 11.5% of the overall antenna usage that they were able to track. And what I mean by that is there's numbers of calls which Sprint hasn't recorded the antenna that's actually being used for. So for those that they're actually able to establish a tower, about 11.5%. It was
Right.
actually the third most used tower.
So about a little over 10% of her time is between those areas, correct? It marks off with that cell tower.
Correct.
Give me 1 second, Joe. I have no further questions of Mr. Sawicki. Thank you.
Magmano.
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What's your name again?
John Sawicki.
Have we ever met before?
I can't tell you for sure.
You're not our expert on this case, right?
No, sir.
You're tied over to Sigfredo Garcia.
Yes, sir.
Quick question, quick topic. What is kicking for a tower?
Kicking. I'm not familiar with that as a technical term. If you're referring to the process of a phone call using a tower other than the immediate tower next to it, I suppose that could be what you're referring to.
It is, yes, and sorry for using the crude language. Basically, if you could explain to this jury how somebody could be in the vicinity of a tower, I could be close to a tower and within one sector, but not communicating with that sector of that tower, but instead communicating with another tower or a further away tower.
Your question kind of anticipates that you would only connect to one tower from a particular location. It's certainly not the case. You could connect to a number of towers from any particular location, depending on where you happen to be in the circumstances at a particular time. The cell phone is going to connect to the tower with the strongest, cleanest signal. That could be the closest tower. It could not be the closest tower. It just depends on all the specifics of the network, of the geography, of the area at that particular point in time.
If there were a lot of traffic, and we're not talking about cell phone traffic, we're talking about vehicles, a lot of traffic on somewhere like Biscayne, rush hour, people on the phone, and there's a lot of traffic on one sector of one tower, could that cause somebody to not communicate with that sector and instead communicate with another tower?
Your question presupposes you would have automatically connected to that tower in the first place, and I don't know that that's necessarily the case. If you're suggesting that you've got two towers in one location, and because of network traffic at that point in time, you're unable to connect to cell tower A, and instead you connect to cell tower B, that's certainly possible. But regardless of that, you certainly have to be within the range of cell tower B.
And last question, that range. I know it's dependent on specific towers. You can be miles away from a tower and still communicating with that tower, right?
Depending on the tower, yes.
And this is not just 1 or 2 miles, this can go up to 10 or more miles, is that correct?
Depending on where you're at, absolutely.
One brief second, Your Honor. No further questions, thank you. Mr. Sawicki.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have 1 moment, Your Honor.
Somebody needs a break? All right, we'll take 10 minutes. Either side, anything?
No, sir.
No, Judge.
There.
All right, 10 minutes.